Hello, and welcome to number 12 of Thoughts of a Whole Brain Man. Being of light heart is something that is an aspiration for many people. But what do we mean when we talk about being of light? Because the word light can refer to an intensity of brightness. The word light can also mean some kind of comparative comprehension of the weight of something. Is something heavy? Is something light? Is something heavier than something else? Or is something lighter than something else? So for a lot of people, the word light becomes synonymous with that of spirit, of divinity, of deity. So to be a person of light suggests that a person, from an esoteric perspective, is a person who aspires towards divine goodness in some way, a compassion, of kindness. But there's also another way of looking at this in terms of weight of things, which is obviously metaphorical. So it's the idea of an intensity of brightness. Because I guess, from a practical perspective, it would be true to say that all of us, every single form of life on this planet, is made of stardust. That doesn't mean we're from stars as such. You know, we haven't just emerged out of a big lump of helium explosions, right? But the cooled down stuff of stars becomes the mineral components that cluster together and have clumped together to make, this planet Earth. And we just happen to be in that Goldilocks zone betwixt the sun and the coolness of space. And if we were just a little bit closer, like Venus, we'd boil. And if we were just a little bit further away, like Mars, we'd freeze. And we just happen to be in this nice, easy bit where life as we know it has emerged. So, in one perspective, yes, we are all of the light. And yet, when you look at the behaviors of human beings, one is inclined to think of something that Spike Milligan once said. In a book called Small Dreams of a Scorpion, Spike Milligan wrote, "God made night, but man made darkness." So sometimes we can think of darkness as a metaphorical description or illustration of the unkindness of human beings, the cruelty that human beings are capable of. So suddenly we find that we have some kind of spectrum with an intensity of light or goodness at one end and an intensity of darkness or shadow, cruelty, sadism at the other end, with maybe something like grey in the middle. But first of all, before we explore that, I just want to show you an older idea of this sense of light meaning weight. This is an illustration from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and it describes a perspective on the nature of what happens when we die. Now, this is a perspective, which means it isn't necessarily the truth in an objective sense. It's a notion, a philosophy, an idea. And there are many ideas from various religions and various philosophies of what happens, if anything at all, when we finish breathing. I personally have a knowingness that there is a part of my life, my essence, my light, as it were, that has continuum, an eternal continuum. And out of all of the different versions of what happens when we die, this is my favorite for a number of reasons. One is that instead of an external agency making or casting judgment upon you, in the Egyptian version of what happens when you die, You evaluate yourself. Now, the self is evaluated with a sense of weight. Let me just show you what's happening here. Uh, you can see that there's a space, and in this space there is a scale. On one side of the scale, there's a bottle, and the soul, or the heart, has been placed in the bottle. On the other side of the scale, there is a feather to see how light you are. This chap kneeling down, this is Anubis, and in this context, he is the gatekeeper of the dead. So when you die and you come out of your body, if you have awareness, you know exactly where you're going, and whoa, off you go. But if you haven't the awareness and you're not sure what to do, and you might be bewildered or confused because you can't get back in your body anymore, Anubis will come to meet you, and he will guide you to the great chamber where all the other deities, gods and goddesses, are waiting. This is Matt, he's all wisdom, and this chap on the left, this is Thoth, Thoth, which is very similar syntactically to thought. And his function in this context is just to make a record. So he doesn't make a decision or cast an opinion, just records what takes place. And in this chamber, there are 42 deities, 42 gods and goddesses. And imagine that you're in a space where there are 42 gods and goddesses, and they've all been watching the video of your life. Imagine it where you are. I have no idea where you're watching this, but just imagine that around you there are gods and goddesses, and they have not only just been watching the video of everything you've done in this lifetime, but they're also aware of your private thoughts and feelings. And the ripples on the pond, the consequences of all of your actions, the consequences of all of your words, the consequences of your thoughts and deeds, everything. And in this great chamber, the soul is called upon to make declarations of truth. There are 42 declarations. And at the end of each declaration, you personally has an experience. I'll recount it now, but not the whole thing, just to give you an example. Right? And we'll pick 3. So just imagine that around you right now, there are gods and goddesses that have been watching the video of your life. They know everything about you. And you are about to say out loud to them a statement, and you are going to say it as if it's 100% absolutely irrefutably true. And once you've said it, notice how you feel in your body. Okay, you ready? All right. So I'm going to say it, and obviously imagine that you're saying it in your own voice, in your own mind. Okay. I have not murdered or slain another human in this lifetime. How do you feel saying that? Do you feel okay? Yeah, I hope so. Try another one. I have never allowed my heart to burn with anger. You just might have a slight ooh feeling. Try another one. I have never set my mouth in motion against another person. Oopsie. Oh dear. Now, if you're feeling like me, a slight hot under the collar, the bashful feeling, like as if you've kind of just sunk down very slightly, that emotion is the emotion of learning. And when we experience that on our bodies, it's sometimes called guilt, it's sometimes called shame, it's sometimes called regret. Those are the different names for the same sensation, which is the inner being learning something. And because there's an accompanying heavy or sinking feeling that comes with it, you are now heavier than the feather. And that means you have to be reincarnated again and have more experiences, adventures, and learnings in various contexts on mountains, by rivers, by the ocean, in land, in urban spaces, countryside spaces, warm environments, cold environments, wet environments, humid environments. You'll be male, you'll be female, you'll be in between. You'll be wealthy, you'll be poverty stricken, you'll have power, you'll be on the receiving end of someone else's power. Round and round and round and round, different contexts, short, thin, tall, sightful, non sightful, every which way you can think. And having a multitude of experiences of lifetimes, gradually, 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 your heart learns to be light, even in extreme circumstances. And when you are in the great chamber and you can make the declarations and remain as light as the feather, then your time on this earth plane, in this earth school, is done. That's the Egyptian version of what happens when we die. So that's about weight, sensations of heaviness. I would say, though, before we just stop this part here, that it could be the case that when we attempt to evaluate ourselves while we're alive, that essentially we're attempting to explore and examine ourselves through the lensing of our current psyche, the persona that you have for who you are right now in this lifetime. But when we leave life, we leave behind that identity and the shackles, or if you like, or the filters of that identity. And we experience the fullness of soul. And we also experience the broadest sense of that which our soul knows, which is far more than our small sense of consciousness that's incarnated at present. So it could be the case that there's something that you feel guilty about in this life, but on the other side of death, when you evaluate it, given the context that you're in, the upbringing that you had, the things that were happening around you, etc., then you were responding just in the best way you could. And there isn't a need to feel guilty about that at all. Then again, on the other hand, there might be some things that we don't feel guilty about, but maybe we should, you know? So to attempt to evaluate your goodness or your wickedness, your light or your shadow while you're alive is almost impossible to do objectively. You have to wait until you're on the other side of death for that. Once you're fully in the realm of spirit, only then can you evaluate this period of time, what you've done, what you've experienced, what you've achieved, what you haven't. So any attempt to decide for yourself if you're, good or bad, wonderful, brilliant, terrible, awful, while you're alive is a bit premature, really. The only thing one can do is aspire towards kindness at all times. And you'll mostly get there. Which kind of takes us to the other way of thinking about the light and dark of self in terms of light as an intensity. So if we have this kind of spectrum where you've got shadow and darkness at one end and light at the other and maybe grey in the middle, I would say that for the most part, most people are sort of light grey, really. They'll help you out, but they'll look after their own first, you know? I would say that it's very rare in life that we have an encounter with someone who's very light. Fortunately, it's also very rare in life that we encounter people who are very dark. Personally, When I was young, as you know from the previous Whole Brain Man video, I wanted to know who should I follow, who should I look at. And when I found that Einstein quote saying we must free ourselves in this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures. We may not achieve this, but if you aspire to that as a goal, it takes you in the direction of development, improvement, and inner freedom and strength. The Dalai Lama would support those kind of comments because I've heard him talk about it for an hour in Nottingham in 2008. So aspire towards kindness. Be as free as you can in your thinking. Be as objective as you can in your evaluations. Be as fair as you can. You know, it's impossible to do that completely because we respond and react through the current lensing of our psyche. But if you can imagine that the brain, just imagine the brain for a moment, is the conduit or the mediation point between the light of the soul and one's expression of self in the world through words, actions, deeds, etc. Right? And the light of the soul kind of pours in to the skull, the brain. And if you could imagine the brain, instead of being like a bag of neurons, which it is, just imagine for a moment it's like a crystal. So the light of the soul comes into the crystal and then it shines out through our eyes and our voice and our hands and our behaviors, right? If that crystal has cracks, damages, fissures, shadows in it, then the light of the soul, being pure, comes into the crystal, but then it's a distorted light that comes out into the world. This is an esoteric perspective of what one might describe as trauma. So when human beings have hurts, pains, wounds, traumas, these are retained in our system until they are healed. Healing is possible. Repair is possible. But until repair is done, until healing takes place, the wounds consist and persist, right? So if a person has wounds, whether you consider that to be the psychological mechanism of repression, or whether or not you consider that to be a physical experience of, say, toxins lodged in the body, or whether or not you consider that to be an esoteric expression of the brain as a crystal with distortions and cracks in it, whichever kind of way you want to think about it, right? That means that the light of the soul comes out in a distorted sense. So a person's desire to be kind and, helpful comes out in a distorted way. So it can come out as sarcasm and things like this, right? In one sense, then one could say that the function or purpose of therapy is to fix the cracks, to repair the brain. You could say that in a psychological sense, psychoanalysis and therapy, the purpose of that is to repair the unconscious, etc. So whether or not a person is of light, intrinsically as a being they are, the orientation of their behavior, the orientation of their sense of how they react and respond to the world around them, and whether or not you are safe in their company, that's another matter. So I would always highly recommend having the ability to pay attention to your instinctive wisdom, which sometimes registers as tingly sensations in the tummy, and use that to use, I guess, a common phrase might be, a modern phrase would be a bullshit detector. But use your body's ability to detect subtle signals in people, so that if you get what modern people call red flags, or any kind of emotion in your body that feels slightly uncomfortable or a little bit frowning, then be wary, be mindful, be streetwise, be generally friendly, but also be incredibly fussy about who you allow into your sphere. And if your sphere has layers, so you've got the outer ring for your acquaintances and, you know, various rings of chums and mates leading to friends, deep friends, lifelong friends, and your deepest loved ones right in the middle, and you are in the center of your world, then you'll find that at sometimes a person might naturally slot into the friend zone and then they change or you change and they're no longer compatible as a friend. So, as human beings, we change through time. All the other humans we know, they change through time. So, occasionally, you have to reevaluate the dynamical relationship that you share with people. Intrinsically, everyone is of value. Intrinsically, everyone is of the light. But the condition of each person's persona or psyche, that's another thing. So, be mindful, be aware, and allow yourself to be of light heart and enjoy a journey of kindness. Thank you so much for tuning in to Thoughts of a Whole Brain Man. Look after you. Bye.